In war, some decisions defy logic, some choices seem suicidal, and some orders are remembered forever. On a dark, moonless night in 1943, 800 United States Marines stood silently inside a thin, fragile defensive line. Across the jungle, hidden by darkness, were 900 Japanese soldiers, fanatic, fearless, and preparing for one of the largest banzai charges of the Pacific War. Any other army would have fired early. Any other force would have opened up at 300 yards, 200 yards, even 100 yards. But not the Marines. They waited, motionless, guns cold, fingers on triggers, eyes fixed on the dark. They let the enemy get closer, and closer, and closer still, until the Japanese were only 30 yards away. And then, in a single coordinated blast of fire, they unleashed the most devastating close-range ambush of their entire campaign. This is the story of why they waited, how they coordinated it, and what happened when nearly 900 enemy soldiers walked straight into the jaws of the Marine Corps. Title card: Why 800 Marines let 900 Japanese close to 30 yards, and what they did to annihilate them all.
The Island of Whispers. The island smelled of rotting foliage and damp earth. Palm fronds hung like curtains over the Marine positions, swaying gently in the humid wind. It was quiet. Too quiet. Veterans knew what that meant. Something was coming. The Marines could feel it. The tension in the soil, the stiffness in the air, the way the jungle insects suddenly fell silent. A corporal whispered to his squad, "They're out there. Listen." And they did. Far beyond the tree line, a faint, rhythmic sound. Boots on roots, branches snapping, the low murmur of soldiers preparing for a final, desperate attack. The Japanese were gathering. "We hold fire until my command." The Marines' line was thin, too thin. Only 800 men stretched across a defensive perimeter meant for 3 times that number. Their commander, a quiet but deadly calm major, walked the line with a flashlight tucked into his palm. He gave one order over and over: "Do not fire. Not until I say." Some Marines were confused. Some were terrified. One private muttered, "Sir, 900 bayonets coming straight at us, and we're supposed to wait?" The major crouched beside him. "If we fire too early, they scatter into the jungle. If we wait, they bunch up. They choke each other in the kill zone." He placed a hand on the Marine's shoulder. "We'll kill more in 5 seconds at 30 yards than we ever could at 300.
The kill zone does its work. When dawn finally broke, the full picture was clear. The kill zone looked like a shredded carpet of bodies, weapons lying in splintered piles, helmets cracked open, clumps of uniforms burned or torn, a solid mass of bodies stretching yard after yard. A Marine captain said, "The ground didn't look like soil anymore. It looked like meat." The Japanese never made it through. Not one organized group survived the initial blast. The kill zone had worked exactly as planned. That night wasn't just a battle. It was engineering, preparation, mathematics, timing, control. 800 Marines didn't defeat 900 charging soldiers by chance. They built the battlefield itself to be a weapon. They constructed the terrain, they shaped the angles, they calculated the distances, and they forced the enemy into one single fatal space. This is how 800 Marines held the line and annihilated an entire attacking force. Frozen between life and death. The Japanese were almost on top of them. Marines could hear breathing, footsteps, metal scraping on bayonets. And then, a Japanese soldier stepped into a patch of faint starlight. He was 30 yards away. The major's hand opened. Now! That moment unleashes one of the most violent, devastating ambushes in Marine Corps history. The 30-yard ambush. 800 Marines unleash hell now. At 30 yards, the human eye can see the whites in another man's eyes. At 30 yards, bayonets gleam like silver teeth. At 30 yards, there is no more time for strategy, only survival. When the Marine Major finally opened his hand, the line exploded. Boom, 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 boom. Krata, krata, krata. Pop, 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 pop. 800 Marines fired at the exact same second, as if one trigger controlled the entire defensive line. The night lit up like a thunderstorm, a wall of fire. The first burst of fire was so loud, so violent, the Japanese soldiers in the front ranks literally froze mid-step. Machine guns began carving through the darkness. M1919 Brownings spitting unbroken streams of lead. Bar gunners firing in sweeping arcs. Garans cracking in perfect rhythm. Shotguns roaring like cannons in the night. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. A Marine later said, "They came in like a wave. We turned it into red mist." Japanese soldiers in the lead ranks dropped instantly. So fast, the men behind tripped over their bodies. The enemy trapped in their own momentum. The Japanese attack formation was compact, tight, and pressing forward with unstoppable belief. That belief killed them. When the Marines opened fire at 30 yards, the enemy had no room to maneuver, had no room to take cover, had no room to retreat, and no time to understand what was happening. Hundreds were trapped in a funnel of death. A Japanese survivor later wrote, "The Americans waited until we were already dead. The machine guns do the impossible." Marines had set up overlapping fields of fire, 2 M1919s covering the left, 3 BAR teams covering the center, 2 more machine guns covering the right, Garand rifles filling every gap. The result? Every single Japanese soldier was caught in at least 2 guns' crossfire. At 30 yards with Browning machine guns firing, flesh tears instantly, bone shatters,
Armor-piercing rounds ripped through multiple bodies at once. Bayonet charges collapse in seconds. One Marine gunner described it. It was like cutting down a wheat field.
The night turns into hell. Despite the slaughter, dozens of Japanese kept coming. Some wounded, some crawling, some screaming banzai in sheer desperation. Those who reached 20 yards were met with grenades, shotgun blasts, bayonets, point-blank pistol fire. A Marine sergeant yelled, "Keep firing! Don't let them break the line!" The jungle filled with muzzle flashes. Smoke drifted low across the ground. Tracers carved red lines through the trees. And through it all came the screams. Both sides locked in a brutal, primitive struggle. Japanese officers tried to push forward. The Japanese commanders saw their attack stalling and charged forward, swords drawn, shouting commands, "Advance! Advance! Banzai!" But the Marines had zero intention of letting an officer live long enough to reorganize. Machine gunners targeted the leaders first. Crack! A Marine lieutenant shouted, "Cut down the officers! Drop 'em!" Within seconds, nearly every Japanese commanding voice went silent. A banzai charge without officers becomes a confused mass, and confusion becomes death. Bayonets in the dark. But even with devastating fire, some Japanese soldiers made it through, crawling, rolling, sprinting in the dark. The fight became a nightmare at the line itself. Bayonet versus bayonet, knife versus entrenching tool, helmet smashed against skull, point-blank rifle shots illuminating faces. A Marine recalled, "They were in our holes, in our bushes, everywhere." But Marines fought like demons. This was no ordinary unit. These were hardened Pacific veterans, trained in brutal close-quarters combat. Within minutes, the Japanese who reached the line were destroyed. The final 10 minutes of slaughter. The charge lasted roughly 15 minutes. Only the first 2 minutes involved actual movement. The rest was just destruction. When the firing finally slowed, when the screams faded, when the smoke thinned, the Marines lifted their heads from their foxholes. What they saw stunned even the veterans. A carpet of bodies stretched across the jungle floor, stacked 2, sometimes 3 deep, bayonets still pointing forward, rifles fused to hands by rigor mortis, flag remnants fluttering in the night breeze. A Marine said, "It looked like someone laid down a road of bodies, all the way to our wire." All 900 Japanese soldiers who charged were destroyed. Almost none made it back. The Marines held the line. The Marines didn't survive because they were lucky. They survived because they understood one brutal truth of the Pacific War. Let the enemy get close and destroy him in one overwhelming blast of fire. This was not chaos. This was not panic. This was discipline, coordination, experience, and a willingness to stand firm when the rest of the world was screaming. The Japanese came to die. The Marines came to kill. Only one side walked away.
How Marines engineered the perfect kill zone. When 900 Japanese soldiers charged into the Marine line that night, it looked like the Americans simply reacted. But the truth was far more brutal. The Marines didn't just survive, they engineered the battlefield to destroy the enemy. Every log, every foxhole, every machine gun angle, every inch of ground had been shaped into a trap. This was not luck, this was design. Choosing the ground. The Marines picked a narrow stretch of jungle where the trees funneled movement. The ground rose slightly in front. Visibility was just enough to see silhouettes. Attack routes were predictable. Flanking was nearly impossible. In other words, the perfect natural choke point. Marine officers walked the perimeter hours earlier and whispered, "If they come from that direction, they'll bunch up right here." That right here would later become a killing field. Machine guns placed like spears. The true secret of the kill zone was interlocking fire. The Marines didn't place machine guns pointing forward, they placed them diagonally, so the two Browning machine guns' fire intersected the exact spot where the Japanese were expected to charge. This created a V-shaped cone of overlapping bullets. Every Japanese soldier hit from multiple angles. No blind spots, no safe patches of jungle, total saturation. A Marine gunner said, anything that entered that space got cut in half. Machine guns weren't scattered randomly, they were mathematically positioned.
Bar teams to fill every gap. Barmen, Browning automatic rifle teams, were strategically placed between machine gun nests. Their job? To kill anything that slipped through the crossfire. Bars had high mobility, rapid bursts, powerful 30-06 rounds, excellent accuracy. Every barman was told, if one gets past the MGs, he's yours. This turned the Marine line into a layered death net. Nothing was getting through. Garand riflemen for precision kills. Behind the heavy guns, riflemen with M1 Garands lined the foxholes. The Garand changed everything. 8-round semi-auto, fast follow-up shots, devastating stopping power, perfect for close-range ambush. While the machine guns shredded the bulk of the charge, the riflemen targeted officers, dropped runners, killed wounded attackers trying to crawl forward, shot advancing bayonet groups before they reached the wire. One Marine said, "Every trigger pull put a man down." The Garand made sure the kill zone stayed clean. No survivors advancing.
Tripwires, bottles, and silent alarms. What the Japanese didn't know was this. The Marines already knew exactly when the enemy was coming. They set up tripwire alarms, not for detonation, but for noise only. Glass bottles tied to vines. The slightest movement made a sharp clatter. Metal scraps hung like wind chimes, rustling before the enemy appeared. This told the Marines how far the enemy was, how many were coming, and where they were moving. A corporal whispered to his squad, "They're in the wire. Get ready." Without these silent alarms, the 30-yard ambush would never have worked. Letting the enemy commit to the kill. Japanese banzai charges relied entirely on momentum. If Marines fired too early, the Japanese would scatter, use jungle cover, flank the line, infiltrate foxholes. But if Marines waited until the enemy was fully committed, the attackers couldn't stop. The rear ranks crushed the front. They had no room to maneuver, they jammed into their own deaths. This is why Marines held fire until 30 yards. At that distance, Japanese rifles were useless. Bayonets needed another 2 to 3 seconds. Marines held every advantage. The enemy was trapped by their own charge. A Marine officer explained, "We waited until God couldn't save them." Pre-sighted ranges, the kill zone secret. Every gun in the line was pre-sighted. Machine gun teams had range cards, exact distances marked, preset elevation, preset wind adjustments, which meant when the officer shouted "now," the Marines weren't firing randomly. They were firing at a known mathematical kill point. Distance to target, 30 yards. Elevation, already set. Spread, already rehearsed. No guessing, no adjusting. Just pure, calibrated destruction. A sergeant shouted during the fight, "Hold your range! Hold your range!" He wasn't telling them to aim. He was telling them to trust the pre-planned angles.
The kill zone does its work. When dawn finally broke, the full picture was clear. The kill zone looked like a shredded carpet of bodies, weapons lying in splintered piles, helmets cracked open, clumps of uniforms burned or torn, a solid mass of bodies stretching yard after yard. A Marine captain said, "The ground didn't look like soil anymore. It looked like meat." The Japanese never made it through. Not one organized group survived the initial blast. The kill zone had worked exactly as planned. That night wasn't just a battle. It was engineering, preparation, mathematics, timing, control. 800 Marines didn't defeat 900 charging soldiers by chance. They built the battlefield itself to be a weapon. They constructed the terrain, they shaped the angles, they calculated the distances, and they forced the enemy into one single fatal space. This is how 800 Marines held the line and annihilated an entire attacking force. When the sun finally rose over the jungle, the battlefield lay silent. The smoke drifted in thin, ghost-like strands across the ground. The air smelled of gunpowder and sacrifice. 800 Marines held their positions, bruised, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. In front of them lay the remains of an entire Japanese regiment, broken by a single night of discipline, courage, and perfect coordination. This wasn't a victory born of luck. It was a victory shaped by preparation, by hardened men, and by the brutal lessons of the Pacific War. They had waited until the last possible second. They held their nerve when any other force would have fired early. And when the moment came, they unleashed a storm the enemy could never withstand. Today, that battle stands as one of the Marine Corps' most astonishing examples of deadly patience, iron discipline, and unbreakable resolve. Because on that night, the Marines didn't just fight. They proved why their motto is carved into history: first to fight.